This morning, I'm eager to hear Gregg. I looked at his resume and I thought it would take me a long time to introduce him based on all of the things that he's done over many years of work, and he's written over 28 books, actually, bestsellers, some of them, and he, early in his career, looked at how to treat some of the things that we know are epidemic in our culture, in people's lives, depression and things that are very painful, and began to see that if we didn't approach that in a holistic way, multidiscipline way, that we didn't really see transformation. So today, he's going to be talking to us. The topic is self-responsibility in successful people. So I'm really going to be interested to hear how he defines that, because it was a long title. So we're going to be looking at how that impacts our satisfaction in life. And I think that's what we all want to grow in. So come on up, Gregg. We're glad to have you.
I went to school at Seattle Pacific University. My wife and I actually founded a place that is called the Center, a Place of Hope. And I have about 40 on staff, so I have got physicians and counselors, dietitians, and we believe in the whole person, putting everything all together. So we work with people, literally 70% of our patients or clients come from outside the state and international. So we have a lot of folks that come in from, actually from China. I've got clients who've come from Hong Kong, and they're with us for 4 weeks, 6 weeks, whatever they need. And so I have an opportunity to give you a few gifts this morning. Would that be all right? Yeah. Just for fun? I actually did just finish my 30th book. Wow. And it's a gift this morning, and it has nothing to do with our topic. How's that?
So this is number 30.
This is number 30. And I did this with it's a co-authored book with the president of the American Christian Counseling Association. It's called Don't Call It Love. It's on relationship dependency. Right. This word called codependency that we've heard, we've kind of changed it. But what is healthy relationships? How do we have those in our lives? So this morning, just come up, grab a copy. It's yours as a gift. Just for fun. You know, you came here Friday morning, you came early. My goodness. I have 2 boys. I have a 7th grader who's trying to figure out what junior high means. Like, there's homework now and so forth. And I have a junior in high school. And one of my books is Raising Boys by Design. Wow. And so this was a book that I wrote with a brain expert on the whole area of developmentally, how the boy brain is different. Do you know now 90% of the D's and F's in school go to boys? 90%. It was 70%. We have a new way. We've got, what is the new curriculum that Common Core. Common Core is not helping boys. Boys are failing. So this is all about how do we raise our boys to succeed and make it through school. Okay. Who has a neighbor that needs this?
A neighbor.
I got 4 boys. Here we go. Chris has 4 boys. The World Health Organization says that depression will be the number 1 problem in the world by year 2020. Depression. That puts depression above heart disease. It puts depression above cancer. Depression. Isn't that interesting? So a couple years ago, a news organization did a survey or research on where's the best place to get help if you're suffering from depression. And we were placed on the number 1 spot to get help for depression. And it has to be because There was 10 places that were identified. It has to be because of the whole person approach and how we've got to do this differently. So here's a book. Depression. It's turning you up into turning. Yeah. Okay. Battles men face. Oh, that was enthusiastic. No, like. When I talk about battles men face, it's like, what is true significance, and what do I do that gives me meaning that's really beyond work? Now, who has a neighbor that could benefit from this? Gary does.
Hello, the boys.
She would really like the one on boys.
On boys? You have a boy. Well, okay. Might have to arm wrestle for that one. Anxiety, worry, and fear. Biggest thing we see is depression, followed by anxieties, and this is a book related to anxiety. Isn't it nice to start the day with a gift? Has nothing to do with the topic. The first book I wrote was in 1995, and it was on emotional abuse. Now, we hear a lot about abuse. 1 out of 3, according to FBI statistics, females will be a victim of sexual abuse by her 18th birthday. 1 out of 7 boys. But we don't hear a lot about emotional abuse, or even what that is. But it's a form of abuse that obviously creates bruises and scars. And so this book was first written in 1995. Few revisions, but it's been the biggest book I've ever done. Emotional abuse. Who would have known? Of course. Sunshine, we have to give you something. All right, shall we talk about our topic today? How are you guys? Self-responsibility, what comes to mind? By the way, my first job out of school was at a women's prison. I live in Edmonds. I did then, I still live in Edmonds. I would commute to, anybody know where the women's prison is in Washington State? Purdy. Have you been there?
It's a Purdy place.
It's a Purdy place. It looks like a community college campus except for the barbed wire around the campus. That was my first job. I was assigned to the special needs section of the women's prison. Do you know what a special needs section is? Can you imagine that as my first job? Picture this, over 30 years ago, so no gray hair. And I'm assigned my first job to the special needs section of a women's prison.
Wow.
What a job. It was the center of the prison. It was the roughest, toughest, and meanest women they had there. And it was a compound of about 25. That was my first job. Can you imagine that? Working in, and here I am, I'm a young guy, and you know what? The women in the prison, they hadn't seen a guy for a while, or they were really angry at men. Neither was good. And from there, there's a lot of eating disorders. We began to develop a model for treating anorexia, bulimia, and some of the eating disorders, compulsive overeating. And that was our beginnings, and that's something we still work a lot with. But when I hear the word self-responsibility, here's what comes to my mind. We have folks in our programs that we're a 40-bed facility, so people actually come and stay in nice condos, and we work a lot with business folks and executives in some pretty high-profile situations. But there's something that happens with somebody where we start to see them accelerate their growth. Something happens. And it has to do with self-responsibility. And it really dawned on me when people begin to take self-responsibility, which we'll define, things begin to change. And some of our, quote, most successful folks that come to see us are enormously successful in one area of their life. Business, finances, whatever. But the other area of their life, relationships, marriage, etc., is literally in shambles. And they haven't figured out, how do I do this? And so that's something we see a lot. And they end up very depressed. I have great success in one area, but I'm very depressed in the other areas of my life. And my life is unmanageable ultimately. And then they end up with us, which we're glad about. But self-responsibility, here's what when it's not there. Here's some of the things that people do when it's not there. I call it low impulse control. Do you know we live in an instant click world, don't we? We can get anything instantly, and we want things quickly. People who come to us, depressed, not doing that great, they want it quick, right? We want to take a pill and have it all done. The average person coming to us is already on 5 or 6 different prescriptions, different pills. The one pill approach hasn't really worked, or the multiple pill approach. And that's kind of our mentality. We want it quick. We live in an age with our kids of entitlement. You see this entitlement? I have my 7th grader wanted to know the other day, he goes, Dad, when do I get the iPhone 6? His name is Benji. Benji, tell me why you would want an iPhone 6. You know, he's 13. What's his answer?
Everybody else.
All the other kids. Yeah, my phone's old, Dad. You're 13 and have a phone. That's pretty good. But we live in an age of entitlement, and so we develop this low impulse control. People with low self-responsibility have really low impulse control. And you see it in how they live their life. They lose the ability to self-regulate or have delayed gratification. And one of the things that I'm working with in my boys and family is how do we really teach our kids and adults how to do delayed gratification so that you can develop and not have this low impulse control. My 16-year-old, when he was 11 years old, had an idea that he was going to write, I was sharing earlier, the CEO of the Segway company. You know, Segways are those mobile devices, 2 wheels, and you're buzzing around. And he wrote the CEO a letter, and before I know it, we're on a flight to New Hampshire to visit this factory. So we visit a factory, and at 11 years old, he says, Dad, I'd like to start a Segway tour business. I said, well, you know, you're in junior high. And so he slowly over time, we created a business model. He had to go meet a banker. He had to go meet the attorney. He had to write up a plan. He had to study Edmonds and learn all the history. And he had to figure out how he was going to do this and make a profit. And this is his, we're going on 5 years. He worked it up. He's in high school. He worked it up to have a storefront. Now, we could have done all that instantly, but it wouldn't have worked. And the ability to delay and build and not be impulsive, but to build and have a plan. That's a trait of a healthy person. When we look at emotional intelligence, one of the highest indicators of emotional intelligence is the ability to delay gratification. So, self-responsibility, I can delay gratification. Isn't that interesting? A person who has low self-responsibility also is a habitual blamer. Do you know anybody or do you have somebody in your life? Hopefully you're not married to them, but they're just a habitual blamer. They blame everybody and they have a real critical spirit. They're just critical. After a while, they're no fun to be with. If you're around a critical person, because they're always going to be fault finding. You can have a discussion with them, and before you know it, you're being blamed for something, and you go, "What?" Or you'll see that they're blaming. They'll blame the economy. They'll blame the but there's a spirit of negativity. Dr. Gottman, who did all the relationship research early on at the University of Washington, kind of coined a phrase called perpetual negative perspective. This is the person who's a blamer. They don't take self-responsibility. They're really good about passing it over to somebody else and blame. All right, do you know somebody like that? They're just really critical and blaming. Yeah. And they're no fun to be with, are they? I mean, you don't really want to hang around them too long. And they're critical of you. So they don't score very high on taking self-responsibility. After a while in relationships, a person who's critical, they develop this mean-spiritedness. They're kind of just mean-spirited. And you feel like you can't do anything right for them. And that's their perspective. It's a perpetual negative perspective. Doesn't sound real encouraging, does it? Do these people change?
Yes.
They can. But they have to develop one of the traits of a person with high self-responsibility. And one of those traits is they have to learn how to be a forgiving person. One of the traits that really is high on the list is for self-responsibility is it's a person who learns how to initiate, keyword, initiate forgiveness. An initiator of forgiveness. It's the person that can actually say, I'm sorry, I made a mistake, will you please forgive me? A person in low self-responsibility or a blamer, that doesn't even come to their mind because they already know you're at fault. So, yeah, forgiveness. And this is one of the things that we see in people that we work with as a major roadblock. A person who's been victimized or traumatized or hurt, and they've carried it for years and years, and they really haven't come to that place of forgiveness or self-forgiveness. Sometimes we can forgive others more easily than ourselves. And so the whole area of self-forgiveness and being a forgiving person. A lot of confusion around that. So now we see that folks really start growing in their work with us when they begin to learn the power of forgiveness. And it's really, because if I learn how to forgive, and I learn how to forgive, and even in business relationships, something else begins to happen, and it's gratitude. Gratitude begins to emerge. And this is what we see with our clients. Maybe they're with us for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and they start to make changes, and they start to experience forgiveness, and then they start to be grateful. And their language changes. How they talk changes. Do we like to be around grateful people? Isn't it? Yeah. Don't they make us feel good? And a grateful person will also score very high on optimism. They'll be optimistic. And we like being around optimistic people. Harvard did this long study, longitudinal study, and there's a book out, a fairly recent book out about it, but they studied men. And over the course of time, you may have heard this, but they were studying about basically optimism. And does it make any difference in a person's life? And so the men who were part of this study didn't really know for sure what was being measured. And each year they had to report in, and of course they were tested. But they were being measured ultimately on optimism. How optimistic, and does it make any difference? Do you report having healthier relationships? Is your physical health different if you have optimism over the course of your life? And what would you guess? Yeah, for a man at least, we know it makes a difference. So optimism, people say I have healthier relationships. I also have fewer health problems. And that's because of gratitude. And so if I score high on taking self-responsibility, I probably am going to score high on optimism and gratitude, and I'm going to be a forgiving person. Now, does this sound like a nice person to be around? So our question at the table when we started today really was, who do you know that's really emotionally healthy? Did we have good role models for this? Most of our families, did we have good role models for what is healthy? If we had a family where there was addiction, if we had a family where there was comparisons, the parent that said, well, why can't you be more like your sister? She succeeds. A family where there was put downs, a family where anger wasn't managed very well. We probably didn't have a good role model. Think about in school. Do we have any courses or classes on what makes for a healthy person? It's like no. Do we have any classes that teach us how to pick a mate or have good relationships, or no. So we tend not to go, well, who is that person that's emotionally healthy? Who is my mentor or role model? So you guys doing okay? All right, just testing, because we have it's 8:10. We have 10 more minutes. Oh, as I think about self-responsibility, those women back in the women's prison where I worked at, a lot of them were mainly blamers, and they were blaming the men that they got in trouble with because they were hanging out with the wrong guys. But they were blaming. And if we keep doing that, we keep recycling over and over and over, and we keep going back because we don't ever get well. And I spent a couple years working at the University of Washington in a sleep laboratory. I know. I was going to school, and I thought, this is great. I can work at night and study, right? I can study while the sleep subjects were sleeping, and I was just an assistant, and my job was pretty easy. I was to put the electrodes on the person's head and make sure everything was all set, because they were studying different sleep cycles, and I thought, easy job, I can study. And at that time, the sleep laboratory, next to it was the monkey lab, where they were doing experiments with monkeys. Can you imagine that being next to the sleep lab? Yeah. So the sleep lab's pretty good size, people sleeping, and then there's the monkey lab that's full of all these monkeys. But then on the other side of the sleep lab was the cadavers for the medical students. And it was a very large room at that time of cadavers. And the cadavers, that room had a smell like formaldehyde, and it was not a pleasant room. Now, I'm right in the middle in the sleep lab, right? Trying to stay awake, trying to study. And when we get really desperate for sleep, what do? We fall asleep. We get desperate. We're desperate for sleep. After we do all the things that try to keep us awake, and then we tell ourselves, okay, because we start to see things and sometimes hear things that aren't there. If you're sleep deprived, you're driving down the road and there's a tree in the road, but there's not a tree in the road. You start to see things. Well, I told myself, because I was pretty tired, I was desperate. This is my confession. I went next door into the cadaver room, and I looked for an empty cot. And I climbed on an empty cot. I was desperate for sleep, and I told myself, I'll just lay down for 15 minutes, just 15. I'm not really sure how much time passed, because the next thing that I remember was the janitor coming in the room. Some point during the night, the janitor came in the room. He flips on the light, and I wake up. I jump off of the cot. The janitor screams, and I take off running to get to the sleep lab, because I don't know what time it is. I don't know. While the janitor is screaming. Now, he had never seen a cadaver get up. I did not ever see him again, and I did not ever go into that room again. But desperate people do desperate things. And if we're not taking self-responsibility, ultimately we start to do really desperate things in our life. And most of the times we do desperate things, we end up with regret. We regret what we did. That could be, we move towards addiction, we move towards things that are unhealthy, our self-care is not good, and we end up in a lot of regret. And so taking self-responsibility requires us to examine our lives for forgiveness. Am I a blamer? Am I carrying old resentments? Am I embittered? It requires us to be open to feedback. I have to be teachable. Part of the definition of humble is to be teachable. And people who are growing and optimistic are humble and they're teachable. We don't like being around people that have it all figured out. The person that has all the answers, or always tell us everything to do and act like they got it all figured out. Because really then what we're talking about is pride. A prideful person. Okay? People who take self-responsibility are not prideful people. They don't have a big sense of ego. And this is something that we see is really powerful in the lives of our clients. They start to become teachable. They start to become humble. They start to take self-responsibility. They start to seek forgiveness. And you start to see a lot of neat things happen in a person's life. And I'm really observing this a lot right now on a personal level in my family. My precious Benji, 13, is struggling with self-responsibility. At home, he can be the most creative on saying he did his homework, or he did something he didn't really do, and is deflecting self-responsibility. And I'm seeing it right at my own home. And of course the mom's response is, where did I go wrong? His life is going to be so messed up. He's getting a D in science. He's ruined. And he's your son. You wrote a book on boys. Yeah, I did. All of us are, on some level, have somebody in our life where we really can see either the absence of self-responsibility and the difference that it makes when people do take that. I see with some of the business folks that we work with, when they go in and kind of go back and they've made some changes, they report a higher sense of just purpose and meaning. It's like, wow, my job and the people I work with matter differently now. And there's something that happens where they really care about people. And it changes the whole tone of an organization. And they switch from maybe more of a prideful, they switch to more of an appreciation and more purpose-driven and wanting to empower people. And I think we love being around others who empower us, who believe in us. So we have a little saying in our home, and don't say it every day, but it's I believe in you. And what I mean by that is I want to impart in the lives of my boys that they know that they have their Father's blessing and that I really do believe in them. And I can't say that if I don't. I struggled through school. It wasn't until my senior year in high school that I really got on a good path. And there was a guy in my life who I think probably God put in my life, but I was at a summer camp. My parents sent me to a camp. Well, maybe this camp will straighten Gregg out. And so I was there, and this guy, he was the speaker. He would follow me around, and he would say, I believe in you, Gregg. And at the camp, the last day of the camp was this big cross-country run. He says, Gregg, you ought to run. I believe in you. You know what? And I just kept ignoring him. The last day of that camp, when they had this big run, and I wasn't a runner. I lined up on that, and I ran. And I ran and I ran and I ran, and I didn't even look behind me. And all I could hear was this guy saying, I believe in you. I believe in you. I believe in you. And I just kept running. And do you know, when I came across the finish line first, I didn't even know I was first. I was just running because some guy said he believed in me and I was going to keep running. And I crossed the finish line first. That was a turning point for my life when this guy said, I believe in you, and I did something as a result of it. A couple years ago when it snowed, we have a real steep driveway. It snowed, and sometimes I have to leave before everybody's up at my house, and I was pulling out the drive, and there was a little snow on the ground. My youngest boy, this Benji, he comes running out in his pajamas, up, walking through the snow in bare feet, and taps on the car window. And I go, what are you doing? And he's in his PJs, and it's freezing and snowing. And he said, Dad, I believe in you.
Wow.
He was like 6, 7. You can impart this in people and believe. Did I have a good day that day? I had a great day. My little ornery kid believed in me. Yeah. So we can do that with self-responsibility, right? Yeah. Thoughts about this today? How are we doing on time? Like perfectly timed. It's 8:20. How'd you guys do that? Yeah. So let's go out today and let's decide who we can believe in, and let's just do a little check up from the neck up. That's what I do. Check up from the neck up, and go. Okay, am I practicing the traits of good self-responsibility? Am I teachable? Am I forgiving? How's my impulse control? So, it's really interesting with technology and impulse control with our youth. You maybe saw the news story earlier. I talk a lot on technology and the role of technology and addiction, because when people come to us, anything with a screen on it is put away in a safe. And over half of our clients, when they start with us, by day 2, because there's no email, there's no texting, there's no laptops, there's no iPhones. By day 2, they're going through withdrawal. They're irritable, they got headaches, they're a little shaky, their palms are sweaty, and they're saying, can I have my phone back? I got to do something. And they're going through withdrawal. They're going through disconnection anxiety. Even 5 years ago, we didn't see it like this. So, yeah, it's interesting. So, you guys have a great Friday. That's all I have to say.